Hi, Bob Sullivan here again, and this time I'm with Lisa Napoli, who is an editor of many books, but she has a new book out called Up All Night, and it's about the founding of CNN. Very timely, 40th anniversary of CNN right now, and we find ourselves at a time where so many Americans just have CNN or Fox or MSNBC on TV all the time. So, Lisa, first start with the beginning. How did you get into this project?
Well, Bob, I started my career as an intern at CNN back in 1981, about a year after it started. And when my last book came out, which was about the founding of McDonald's and the popularization of fast food, an old friend of mine from my CNN days wrote and said, I know what your next book should be. CNN's 40th anniversary is coming up, and no one's ever looked at the origins. There have been a number of books on Ted Turner. There have been all sorts of books by heroes, later heroes of CNN, who people may remember from television, but no one had ever looked at the sort of building blocks, the moment in time, both technologically and the media culture that sprouted CNN. So that's what I decided to do. I was curious too. I didn't know. I certainly didn't think about it back then. And certainly a lot has happened since. So that's what made me interested in it.
Now, the name Up All Night I find fascinating because at a time like today, CNN is literally the background music for life, or whatever your flavor of 24-hour cable news is. It's hard to remember a time when there wasn't 24-hour television news. So talk
Right.
about that innovation. That's really what CNN gave to the world, for better and worse, right?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, that title is not mine. And I, at first, was mad that they saddled it with it. But then I realized that it was a really good one. I wanted to call it Until the End of the World, which is what Ted Turner said when he launched CNN on June 1st, 1980. He said, we're going to stay on till the end of the world. So I thought that was prophetic. And that was before the pandemic. But Up All Night is actually really a nod to the fact that Ted Turner was the first person. I always hate it when people say first, but I'm pretty sure that Ted Turner was the first person to say, let's keep television on all night. And that predates CNN. That was when he had a little junky UHF station that he'd bought for a song in Atlanta that basically was the incubator for what became CNN. Not in the sense that it was an all news channel, but in the sense that when he first bought the station and realized, was told that they couldn't stay on all night, he didn't understand why. It didn't make any sense to him. He was a salesman. He was a billboard salesman. He had bought some radio stations, and time was money. And why the hell would you turn the station off at night? Plus, he was an insomniac. So when someone said, we can't have TV all night, and some people watching this may remember that time when TV did stop after the late night movie, he said that's bunk. And they kept up all night playing reruns. It wasn't live news or live television, but people watched. And that gave him the idea, that and a number of other moments in time that sort of strung together perfectly, that made him realize that he could launch something 24/7. But we were not a 24/7 culture then, for sure.
So we can thank him for a lot of insomnia.
Well, he was an insomniac already, so I think the insomniacs existed, and they listened to all news radio, which was around. It's probably not his fault.
Okay, but there are a number of things that are his fault, or
Yes.
at least I think that people would like to blame him for. So
Yes.
let's begin with that. CNN has its detractors, and I noticed, I think that you're very cleverly trying to say to them, but then read this book, you should understand what it is that you hate so much. So what can we blame him for?
Well, it's interesting because right now CNN is sort of code for the war between liberals and conservatives in this country. But when CNN started, it was absolutely not that. And that's why I'm very eager to always dwell on that, because just like McDonald's didn't start out to be horrible mass-produced food, CNN didn't start out to have an agenda of any sort. It basically started out because Ted was looking at a way to milk this brilliant concept of marrying cable television and satellite. And he just was so high on what sounds like both an antiquated and boring utility. But for him in the 70s, as that marriage was possible, that just unleashed for him this incredible desire to program. And he couldn't do entertainment because HBO had started, and HBO was nothing like it is now. He didn't want to do sports, even though he had a lot of sports programming, partially because he was a sports team owner, because he didn't want to co-opt his UHF station by stealing that. This is before ESPN, by stealing the programming and putting it on a cable channel. And that's why he arrived at news. It was not because of any great love of news or understanding of news or any desire to push an agenda, although he did think, he did not like network news, which was the dominant way for America to get news at that time. So he said, let's try it. And that's when he started recruiting people who, of course, the first people who come to work for any startup shape its future indelibly forever, even if they're only around for a couple of years. And that's exactly what happened with CNN.
Okay, so CNN starts, and then there was a great origin story, I think, of CNN's first win, if you will, in the news business. And I think also it suggests the direction that 24-hour news went. But tell us about CNN's first big hit.
Well, so the idea with CNN was that you would wait. Well, I'll go back. Network news was, I'm going to sit down every night over dinner and watch mediated reports delivered to me by an anchorman who I trusted, and they were all men, which sort of wraps up the day in a nice little package. CNN's idea was, no, we're going to let you watch the story unfold. The story becomes the news. And it may be that the punctuation of it is that there wasn't any big punctuation, but we're watching it unfold. And in 1981, President Reagan was shot, and CNN was still new. It was called Chicken Noodle News by the networks, who did not take it seriously, did not want CNN in their pool, the White House press pool. They wanted nothing to do with it. And then when the president was shot, CNN was first to go on the air with the news that he was shot. Of course, there were many, many unknown variables at that point. The networks followed suit. But what they did wrong was erroneously report that the press secretary had died when in fact he hadn't. And CNN did not. CNN's anchor was really more a win for the anchor, Bernard Shaw at the time, who defied the staff and said, I'm not going to say that on the air because we don't have any proof of it. Now, this is all so phenomenal, and it's so quaint and it's antiquated, because now, of course, they go on the air with anything the minute they hear it, it crosses their iPhone and it's reported, and then we'll figure it out later on. But CNN was still adhering to old school journalistic standards at that point. And that day put them on the map with the rest of the press corps, just because it made them sort of stand up and take note at the efficacy, if you will, of having a 24-hour news channel. Wow, you didn't have to have a soap opera on. You could just stay on with the story and go. And that was basically a proof of concept, if not for viewers, to their peers.
They got respect from peers, but also what a great occasion to explain the need for 24-hour news. Now, just to warp speed here to the ending, 24/7 news, the internet, social media, now we're saturated with this stuff. Is it good what Ted Turner did, or is it bad?
See, I don't say that in the book. I want you to read this and to think about how different everything is. I personally do not consume television news. I personally read the equivalent of a newspaper online. I try not to have alerts on my phone. I need to focus. I think what's happened is we have created a nation of news junkies. And while knowledge is good and understanding is good, there's a real danger in having too much data. I mean, this whole situation with the pandemic, every single person I know thinks they're all of a sudden an epidemiologist or a statistician. And certainly it's destroyed the way we elect any sort of elected officials, most certainly the president, because it goes on too long and it's sliced and diced information-wise in a way that is not helping anybody. It's turned it all into a sporting event. Everything now is a sporting event. So I find all of that troubling, but I certainly would not say that information is bad. It's, I've been joking in a macabre way that during the pandemic, especially, we should have just shut everything down and had one nightly news report where we wrap up the actual information, and the rest of the time put a Yule log on the damn channel, or, you know, a babbling brook or something that calms people down, because finding something out or making something up, for sure, is not helping any of us get through an absolutely terrible, terrible time. But of course, you know, that makes me a wacko for saying that. But I
Uh,
just said it, so it's okay.
I don't think so. I find myself saying all the time, you know, wake me up when there's actual news.
Right,
So,
right, right. And but yet at the same time, if you worked there, you'd understand there being in any sort of newsroom, but especially an all news channel, you understand how hard it is to come up with meaningful content 24 hours a day. And that was a challenge back then that I write about, how they faced that. And it's certainly no less a challenge now that it's a big mega conglomerate owned successful corporation, which was absolutely not when it started. It was perilously close to imploding for years after it started. So
it's always important to understand the origins of where things come from, and now more than ever. So Lisa Napoli, the book is called Up All Night. Good luck with it, and we'll do it
thank
again
you.
soon.
Thank you for having me.